All right, so let's dive into Smile 2.
Okay.
Now I know what you're thinking. Another horror sequel.
Right.
Are we in for like just a rehash of jump scares and that same creepy grin?
Well, that's where Smile 2 gets interesting.
Oh,
It does build upon the unsettling foundation of the original,
right.
but it takes those ideas into like a more complex direction. And it's
Interesting.
generating a lot of buzz, actually.
Oh, wow.
Some critics are even comparing it to Inside Out 2.
Mm.
And not because of the plot, but
Yeah.
because of how both films take familiar elements and weave in some surprisingly deep themes.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
So it's not just about making us jump out of our seats.
No, not really.
What are we talking about here?
So if you think about recent horror films like It Follows or Lights Out,
Yeah.
often the core horror element is tied to mental illness.
Okay.
Smile 2 doesn't shy away from mental health,
Right.
but it also digs into things like self-hatred, addiction, and even the pressures of being a pop star.
Wow, that's a pretty wide range.
It is.
Especially for a horror sequel.
Yeah.
The pop star angle definitely has my attention.
Right.
And speaking of pop stars, we have to talk about Naomi Scott as Sky Riley.
Oh, yeah.
Her performance is just intense.
It is.
I mean, she's put through the emotional ringer in this film.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating about Scott's performance is that it goes beyond just screaming and running.
Right.
She makes the horror feel so internal, so personal.
Yes.
If you think about Sosie Bacon in the original Smile,
Yeah.
both actors managed to convey this sense of like creeping dread,
Uh-huh.
like their own minds are turning against them.
Right.
And that's essential for a horror film dealing with these kinds of psychological themes.
Right. Because it's not just about some external monster chasing them.
Right.
It's like the monster is within them feeding on their anxieties.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the smile creature, I guess.
Yeah.
Tell me more about how this thing operates, because it's not your typical slasher villain.
No, it's not.
So
It's not tied to a specific place. It's more like a curse that attaches itself to a person, passing on to the next victim.
Oh, wow.
And what makes it so terrifying is that it feeds on insecurity and trauma.
Okay.
It manifests as these horrifying visions that are personalized to tap into the victim's deepest fears.
So creepy. And those visions are where it gets really personal.
Oh, yeah.
Like with Sky's deceased boyfriend, Paul, played by Ray Nicholson.
Yeah.
He keeps appearing to her, just twisting the knife in her grief.
It's a great example.
Yeah.
And the casting of Ray Nicholson adds this extra layer.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, can you imagine a more unsettling inheritance than
Yeah.
a smile like your father's?
Oh, my God.
Jack Nicholson.
Wow.
But beyond that, the fact that the creature is preying on Sky's guilt and grief over Paul's death,
Right.
that's what makes the horror hit home. It's not just about being startled. It's
Oh.
about the psychological torment.
And that ties into the whole pop star element, too, right?
Right.
Because the film seems to be saying that fame itself
Yeah.
can be a kind of madness, this
Right.
pressure to always be on,
Right.
to bury your true self and just smile.
Smile 2 blurs the lines between what's real and what's hallucination,
Okay.
making the whole idea of fame feel like a descent into the surreal nightmare.
Wow.
And we see it in Sky's relationship with her mother, who is
Right.
also her manager.
Uh-huh.
There's this constant pressure to perform, to manage her image, to ignore her trauma,
Yeah.
because, hey, the show must go on.
It feels like the creature is exploiting that.
Yeah.
Like it's saying, here's all this buried trauma.
Yeah, right.
Here's all this pressure to be perfect. Let me feed on that.
Exactly, and it turns the internal pressure cooker into a full-blown horror show.
Speaking of a show, there's one scene that really stuck with me.
Okay.
The smile dancer sequence.
Yeah.
It's visually stunning and totally creepy.
Oh, it is.
But tell me more about that. What happens?
It's one of the most talked about scenes. And for good reason. It's like Parker Finn took the idea of a pop music video and twisted it into something genuinely unsettling.
Wow.
So imagine this Sky is on stage,
Right.
surrounded by backup dancers,
Right.
all in these creepy, exaggerated smiles.
Wow.
The music is distorted, the lights are flashing,
Okay.
and you start to question what's real and what's part of the performance.
Oh, wow. That's a really interesting take on that scene.
Yeah.
I have to admit, the film's willingness to explore those darker aspects of the entertainment industry
Right.
really sets it apart from your average horror flick.
Absolutely. And the way Finn uses music and sound design throughout the film
Yeah.
adds this whole other layer of uneasiness to the experience.
Right.
But we'll get into the technical aspects a bit later.
Sounds good. There's one more thing I wanted to touch on before we move on.
Okay.
And it's something that might be a bit controversial.
Right.
The length
Oh, yeah.
This movie clocks in at over 2 hours,
Uh-huh.
which is pretty long for a horror sequel. Do you think it works, or is it just too much?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it really depends on what you, as the listener, are looking for in a horror film.
Okay.
Some critics have argued that the film tries to juggle too many themes,
Right.
that it would have been more effective with a tighter runtime.
Okay.
Others have praised its ambition, saying that the extended length allows for a more nuanced exploration of the characters and their psychological states.
I guess it comes down to personal preference,
Yeah.
but I can see how some people might find it a bit overwhelming.
I can.
I mean, 2 hours of psychological horror can be pretty intense.
Yeah, it's definitely a commitment.
Right.
But what's interesting is that even with the length,
Yeah.
the pacing never really drags.
Well,
Finn keeps the tension building.
Yeah.
Each scene, even the quieter ones,
Yeah.
feels like it's adding to the overall sense of unease.
You're right, and I think that's a testament to how well-crafted the film is.
Yeah.
Even the moments that aren't explicitly scary, they still contribute to this atmosphere of creeping dread.
Exactly. And that brings us to another aspect of the film that's worth discussing.
Okay.
The director's fascination with faces.
Oh, yeah. You can't talk about Smile without talking about the faces.
They can't.
But it's not just about the creepy smiles.
Is it?
No, it's not.
So tell me more about that.
What's fascinating here is how Finn uses faces, both those twisted by the creature
Yeah.
and those just shattered by fear, to really amplify the psychological horror.
Uh-huh.
It's like he's saying, look, the true terror isn't just in the jump scares.
Right.
It's in the breakdown of a person's psyche.
Okay.
The way their entire being is affected by this curse.
And that's something that lingers with you long after the movie's over.
Oh, for sure.
It's not just about being startled. It's
Yeah.
about the way the horror gets under your skin.
Yeah,
And makes you question what's real and what's not.
exactly. And that's where I think Smile 2 really excels.
It's a film that stays with you, that makes you think about the things we try to hide. The smiles we wear to mask our own anxieties and fears.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's definitely giving me a lot to think about.
Yeah,
But we've covered a lot of ground already.
we have.
I think it's time we delve a bit deeper into the technical aspects of the film,
Okay.
like the cinematography, the sound design, and how those elements contribute to the overall feeling of unease.
Absolutely, because Smile 2 isn't just about what you see on the surface.
Right.
It's about how the film uses every tool at its disposal to create a truly immersive and terrifying experience.
I'm ready for it. Let's get unsettling.
Let's do it. So we talked about the themes and the performances.
Yeah.
Let's get into the nitty gritty
Yeah.
of how this film gets under your skin.
Okay.
It's not just the story.
Right.
It's the way the story is told.
Yeah. The technical aspects are just as important as the narrative, especially in horror.
Right.
You need the right atmosphere to really sell those scares.
Exactly. And one of the things that really stood out to me was how Smile 2 plays with framing and perspective.
Okay.
There are these long, lingering shots on faces.
Yeah.
Not just the creepy smiles, but also the reactions of the victims. It's like the camera is forcing you to confront the terror, to really see the psychological toll it's taking.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
There's this one scene where Sky is in a hospital waiting room,
Yeah.
and the camera just stays on her face as she starts to realize that something's not right.
Right.
You can see the doubt and fear creeping into her eyes,
Uh-huh.
and it's way more effective than any jump scare.
That's a perfect example, and it's not just about close-ups.
Right.
Finn also uses wide shots and unsettling angles
Yeah.
to create this feeling of disorientation and unease.
Okay.
It's like you're never quite sure what's lurking around the corner, what's hiding in the shadows.
That constant sense of unease is so important in a film like this.
Oh, yeah.
Keeps you on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop.
And let's not forget the sound design.
Right.
The way Smile 2 uses music and sound effects is masterful.
Okay.
There are these moments of distorted sound,
Yeah.
almost subliminal, that just get under your skin.
Right.
It's like the film is messing with your senses, making you question what's real and what's not.
Oh, man. The sound design is something I always notice in horror movies.
Yeah.
It's amazing how a well-placed sound effect can make a scene 10 times scarier.
It really can.
Did you notice how the film often uses silence
Oh, yeah.
to heighten the tension?
Definitely.
It's like you're waiting for something to happen.
Right.
And that anticipation is almost unbearable.
Exactly. Silence can be just as powerful as any loud noise in horror.
Wow.
It creates this vacuum that your imagination rushes to fill.
Uh-huh.
And often what you imagine is far more terrifying than anything the film could show you.
Okay. Shifting gears a bit, we
Right.
touched on the smile dancer sequence earlier. I wanted
Yeah.
to unpack that a bit more.
Okay.
Can you describe that scene for our listener and explain why it's so effective?
Imagine the sky is on stage performing in front of a massive crowd.
Okay.
The music is pumping, the lights are flashing,
Right.
but something's off.
Okay.
Her backup dancers, instead of their usual synchronized routine,
Uh-huh.
are contorting their bodies in these unnatural ways.
Right.
Their faces stretched into these grotesque, exaggerated smiles.
Yeah, I got chills just thinking about that scene.
Oh, yeah.
The way they move is both mesmerizing and unsettling.
It is.
It's like they're puppets being controlled by some unseen force.
Exactly. And the way the scene is shot with quick cuts and disorienting angles,
Yeah.
it really amplifies that feeling of chaos and unease.
Wow.
It's a brilliant visualization of the film's themes,
Okay.
showing how fame can distort reality, how the pressure to perform can turn something beautiful into something grotesque.
It's like those dancers are a reflection of Sky's internal state.
Yeah.
She's trying to keep it together to put on a show for the crowd,
Uh-huh.
but underneath it all, she's falling apart.
Precisely. And that scene really highlights the film's exploration of the commodification of pop stars.
Okay.
It's not just about the music. It's
Yeah.
about the image, the persona,
Right.
the pressure to be perfect even when you're crumbling inside.
And the smile creature feeds on that, right?
It does.
All that pressure, all that internal conflict. It's like fuel for the fire.
Exactly. The scene is both visually stunning and thematically rich.
Yeah.
It's a prime example of how Smile 2 uses horror not just to scare you, but to make you think.
It's not just mindless gore and jump scares.
No.
There's a real intelligence at work here,
Uh-huh.
a willingness to explore the darker corners of the human psyche.
Right, and the film's willingness to push boundaries is evident in the climax as well.
Oh.
We talked about the runtime earlier
Right.
and how it could be a bit much for some viewers,
Uh-huh.
but I think the extended runtime allows for a more gradual buildup of tension,
Okay.
culminating in this truly harrowing climax.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. The climax is intense. Maybe even a little too intense for some viewers.
Right.
It goes pretty far with the body horror,
Mm-hmm.
but it also feels earned.
Yeah.
Like you've been on this journey with Skye.
Mhm.
You've seen the psychological torment she's endured.
Exactly.
So